And tonight, yet another disturbing new report from the border, this time in the San Diego sector, where a group of 182 Chinese nationals were just apprehended on Tuesday. Remember, we now know of tens of thousands of Chinese nationals that have made it through our southern border. Now, this comes amid a sharp spike in the number of Chinese nationals found crossing the southern border. And the wide open border continues to wreak nothing but havoc on big blue cities, getting flooded with Joe Biden's unvetted illegal immigrants, including New York City. They were welcoming them in the beginning. Now, this is getting to be a rare visit this week. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, well, he headed to New York, and New York's mayor, the ever so incompetent Eric Adams, was so thrilled to hear that the governor of Texas was coming, he offered him a free night's stay in one of the shelters he has built for Joe's illegal immigrants. Take a look.
I was wondering if you could comment on Governor Abbott being here today for the Republican Gallup, and whether you and Judge Radix have talked about serving him with a lawsuit today over the migrant crisis.
I'm going to take executive privilege and answer your question. You know, I'm going to offer him a stay in one of the Hercs so he can see what he has created and understand how we are treating people with the dignity and respect that he should have shown as well. And I'm not quite sure why he's here and what he's doing while here, but he's going to see how you can manage the crises with coordination. Not one child or family sleeping on the streets of the city of New York. And when we coordinate together, we should not displace problems to local municipalities. That is not what executives do, and it's unfortunate that he made the decision to do that.
All right, here to respond is Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who is back with us. Governor, great to have you back on the program. As bad as this has become in terms of a problem for New York City and other blue cities and states, it's tens of millions, most of which are coming through the state of Texas, or were until you circumvented Joe Biden and you started enforcing the laws that he should have been upholding. I want to get your reaction to the invitation, but I also want to remind our audience that 87% of illegal immigrants in New York City, they're not being sent there by you. They've been sent there by Joe Biden and the White House. So maybe his invitation really should go to Joe Biden.
So, Sean, the invitation is nothing more than a gimmick. And what I would suggest to the mayor of New York is there are people dying on his watch, law enforcement officers who are being gunned down by people who have been arrested 20 times. And he needs to take charge and make sure they keep behind bars dangerous criminals who are killing his fellow New Yorkers. He also needs to educate Americans and New Yorkers why he's spending their taxpayer money to house migrants here illegally because of Joe Biden's open border policies. 4 years ago, New York nor America had to do that because President Trump had in place policies that denied illegal entry. Joe Biden is directly violating the laws of the United States of America, and that's exactly why Texas has a border crisis and why New York has a border crisis. That crisis is not going to end unless and until Joe Biden enforces the laws of the United States. What Texas is doing is actually enforcing those laws. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, that's the point. I was going to make the very point if I would have just let you finish. I apologize. And that is that you are now put in the position of doing his job. That's number one. But not only do you have to do his job, then he takes you to court over and over and over again. You get the wrong judge, and then you have to go back to court again and again and again. And yet, this is the same administration that told America for 3 years that the border is closed and the border is secure. None of which was true. We saw the images daily. We showed them regularly on this program. Maybe the mainstream media ignored it. So what is your message to Biden? I think what I'm hearing you saying, and I would agree with the statement, I think he has blood on his hands. And if those people from China, Russia, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Afghanistan, if terror cells are in this country And I think Director Wray all but said that, and I had Congressman Mike Waltz on my radio show today, all but saying that, and there's an attack on this country, he will have all that blood on his hands because he's allowed this to happen by aiding and abetting in the law breaking, and why the FBI director has not stopped this is beyond any comprehension I have.
Well, it should be the FBI director. However, it's the responsibility of the President of the United States because, Sean, of this, and that is Congress has already passed 3 laws on the books before Joe Biden took office. One that requires the president to deny illegal entry, another to detain anybody who does enter illegally, and 3 is to build border barriers. Because Biden is doing none of those, that's why all of these people are coming in, including the terrorists, both known and unknown. And it's also why we have so many people crossing the country. But it's just frustrating and just astonishing that what Texas is trying to do is actually enforce those 3 laws passed by Congress. And because Texas is trying to enforce the laws passed by Congress to deny and detain people coming here, Joe Biden is trying to sue us so that even more people will be able to enter illegally. Our greatest concern is exactly what the director of the FBI talked about, and that is these terrorists coming across the border. And remember, the ones that y'all are talking about are the ones who were apprehended. The terrorists, they know they're wanted, and they pay extra to not be caught. Sean, no one knows how many terrorists are really in America because of Joe Biden's open border policies, and it could lead to a catastrophic event, and it will be on the hands of Joe Biden.
Look, I pray to God I'm wrong. I really do. But I don't think I am. I don't think it's a matter of if. I think it's a matter of when that all of this is going to happen. You know, we've now learned in the last week or so that Joe Biden has been flying illegal immigrants into the country directly. In other words, don't pass go. Don't go through Texas or Arizona or California. No, they will send, on American taxpayers' money, a private plane, fly you to any one of 40 cities in the United States. But we learned this week that 90% of the people, of the hundreds of thousands Joe is flying directly from other countries into this country, we're now learning 90% are in your state of Texas or my state of Florida. Now, what do you make of that, Governor? It sounds to me like, well, revenge, retribution, punishment, I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
So for one, Joe Biden is gaslighting America. But secondly, remember this, what I said earlier. There's a law on the books passed by Congress that required the president to deny illegal entry. He's directly violating the law of the United States of America when he flies people here illegally. He cannot do that. And as a result, Texas is looking at legal action to take against the president because he's in direct violation of the laws. Listen, these are reasons why 2/3 of Americans think that Joe Biden is failing on the border, and it's exactly why Joe Biden is going to get fired this November.
Governor, if I went down to your great state of Texas, and I love the people of Texas, it's a free state. If I went down to Texas and I went down to the border and I picked somebody up that was in the country illegally and I brought them to another state, what are the odds I'd be arrested for human trafficking?
Yeah, Joe Biden would probably have you arrested for human trafficking or for smuggling, for kidnapping. But yet, that's what Joe Biden is doing every single day.
Well said. Governor Abbott, great to see you. And if I was you, I'd get out of there as quick as you can. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.